So it was announced that Alien Isolation 2 is going to be coming. They are in like early pre-production for it. Almost certainly because of Romulus' success, they're going to be doing it. Yeah, on the 10th anniversary, developer Creative Assembly has confirmed that a sequel is in development. Yeah, they say that they're going to come out when they're ready, blah, blah, blah. They're working on it. Still probably very far away. They're just saying, get excited. It's 10th anniversary and it's coming. Now, if you don't know, because this, again, was 10 years ago, there is sort of a controversy around Alien Isolation and IGN specifically, okay? And that controversy has to do with the review. Even now, if you look at these search results, you'll see two very conflicting stories, okay? Revisiting, the title of the video is In Defense of Alien Isolation. Alien Isolation review discussion. Alien Isolation's terrifying introduction to the perfect predator, art of the level. So there's all of these different videos. Why IGN's Alien Isolation review is one of gaming's biggest crimes. So what I think we should do, what did GameSpot give it? GameSpot gave it, was that a 6? Fair. They gave it a fair. So what I want to do is I want to look back at this review, and then I want to see this takedown of the review and see if there's a good point to be made here, because a lot of people blame this review for basically killing off this franchise that they thought had a ton of potential. And whether or not that's true or fair is sort of a secondary question that we can also get to. But this is quite funny. Yeah, so because the AI didn't follow a predictable set path, you didn't like it. How embarrassing. Let's summarize this video. One man gets annoyed that his underdeveloped opinion had people up in arms because of the effect it had, and calls in his stupid friends who have just as badly developed opinions as him so he can puff out his chest like a small child and attempt to save face. I'm not the one to shit on reviewers, but this is the worst review I've seen in my entire life. Ryan McCaffrey, I've never seen a guy look as uncomfortable as he is in this video. I'm kind of glad he felt like that. So strong reactions, right? What was this review? What was this? How did this work? Mentions he keeps getting killed whenever he hides in air ducts. That's kind of where it lives. Okay, let's see. I'm excited. Okay, let's see how bad this was. 10 years ago, my friends. 10 years ago. This is October 3rd of 2014 was when this review went up. Let's see. Dude, I remember playing this in my college house with my buddies. We turned off all the lights, brought our PCs out to the living room, plugged it into the TV.
Opening that includes nostalgic narration and busted tracking on the VCR visual effects, the first minutes of Alien Isolation are far better than any piece of last year's dreadfully disappointing Aliens Colonial Marines. But by the end of the 15 to 20 hours I spent with this mono-E xenomorph survival horror show, I wish I'd stopped after the first half dozen. Isolation impresses out of the gate because its art direction and sound design dutifully nail the vibe of Ridley Scott's original 1979 film. Okay. The story of Ellen Ripley's daughter Amanda looks and sounds like a real part of the Alien universe. From the DOS-based futuristic computers and their scanline CRT monitors to the fear-enhancing orchestral score, Isolation clearly did its homework in the AV department.
Maybe there'll be some closure for you.
My favorite aspect of the presentation is the atmospheric use of fog. These wisps of smoke and clouds of mist look great and aid your stealthy objectives.
Still looks really good even today. I'll give him that. It really does. It really does.
In fact, once the xenomorph starts stalking you through the dark and creepy Sevastopol space station, Isolation hits its stride. It is an absolutely stressful game to play by design. About 99% of your stalker's movements and actions are unscripted, so you genuinely never know if it's going to leave you alone for minutes at a time, crawl into the ventilation ducts in the ceiling and then immediately drop back down, or sniff around the room you're hiding in for 3 minutes, forcing you to wait it out. The slightest sound, light source, or sight of you will cause the serial murdering lifeform to charge and kill you. it's impervious to your weapons. In fact, only a few can even annoy the alien enough to force it to temporarily leave the area. And as you'll come to learn, the alien's unpredictability is both Isolation's greatest strength as well as its most crippling weakness.
Crippling weakness. Okay. So this is one of those points that comes up a lot in game reviews, which is that one man's annoyance is another man's fascination. Okay. And AI is a great part of this. Like, really good AI can feel captivating and interesting because you're like, I don't know what they're going to do next. They're so intelligent, reacting realistically to my movements and behaviors. But on the flip side, if somebody wants to just play it like an arcadey video game and just blast through it, they could get super, super annoyed and go crazy. Right? I think of like The Last of Us Part 2 on grounded difficulty. When you play on grounded difficulty in that game, like the characters and enemies are whistling to each other. They're calling each other's names. If they see something, then they'll call out to their friends and they'll flank together on that position. It's really, really good. It's very impressive. But if you're trying to just play through that quickly and casually, it's going to drive you up the wall. In that game, you know, of course, you can just lower the difficulty if you want less of a challenge. But in this case, like, it's the selling point of the game. That's what this game, Alien Isolation, was about, was this the idea that this huge death machine is unpredictable and will learn based on your behaviors and react realistically to what you do or don't do. It's really, really fascinating. But I have a feeling we're going to hear that really cool thing is what actively annoyed this particular reviewer.
For the first several hours, Isolation's gameplay cycle is as follows. Creep forward, hear the xenomorph, hide, wait for it to leave, and proceed again. This formula works to tense, satisfying effect. Yes, you'll die, quite a lot if you're like me, but during this honeymoon period, Isolation effectively keeps the pressure on. Manually activated wall-mounted telephones are the only way to save your progress, so reaching the next one genuinely feels like a miniature victory unto itself. And getting impaled by the alien moments before you can pick up the receiver is a dramatic defeat.
And I love this kind of thing, okay? I know, like, checkpoints are a modern, like, kind of must-have for a lot of games where they just assume, like, oh, no matter what I'm doing as I'm playing, it's saving my progress. I appreciate games that do not do that, okay? Even something like Dead Rising, where you had to go to the bathrooms to save, I liked that. I really appreciate that it creates, like, heightened stakes as you're running from level to level to level. I love that. I love that. But I can see why some people would be annoyed by it, but I think it's in a game like this, where that tension is supposed to be there, I appreciate it.
The clomping of the alien's footsteps, the bassy whump of it skittering around in the air vents above you, its angry shrieks and hisses, having to lean back and hold your breath as it sniffs for you while you're hiding in a locker inches away from its acidic spittle. They all make Isolation very good at ensuring that you're never comfortable while trying to get the hell off the Sevastopol. A handful of timed hacking minigames you must complete while the creature can be lurking anywhere are also high points of fear. Unfortunately, the campaign mirrors the Sevastopol itself. The longer it drags on, the more it falls apart as it tumbles out of orbit and towards a gas giant. Ripley's nightmare became my own as Isolation moved its goalposts back so many damn times that I had to laugh. There's an oddly extended alien free stretch midway through that pits you against aggro androids instead of organic terrors. Though the hide-and-seek gameplay remains the same, the scares disappear without the singularly lethal force stalking you. It's disappointing that in the late game, Isolation simply spends hours making you run a funless gauntlet and contend with everything it's thrown at you so far simultaneously, rather than throw a new gameplay twist at you. Fright dissolved into frustration as I got killed from behind for the umpteenth time, even as I was crouched motionless and out of sight in an air duct.
You literally were moving. Even in this clip. He's like, I was motionless.
Even as I was crouched motionless and out of sight in an air duct, the survival horror joy found in the campaign's early hours is completely and permanently erased. Even when you finally reach the end, it's an underwhelming conclusion that doesn't adequately pay off the 20 hours you just survived. Oh, and the main menu actually recommends that you play on hard difficulty. Here's a pro tip. Don't do that. Minimize the alien's keen senses and it'll minimize your pain.
This is always a dangerous recommendation to make in a review if you're like, don't play on the recommended difficulty. Because for one, it makes it look like you don't know what you're doing. Two, if it's recommended by the devs, there's probably a reason they recommended it. And if you are struggling with it, it may be a them problem. It may also be a you problem. That he was trying to play through this like a different kind of game, and then he got frustrated when it didn't work like that.
Let's hope this thing works.
It's an animal. Animals are afraid of fire.
I hope you're right.
Alien Isolation seemed like the perfect Alien game on paper, and early on it seems to deliver on its promise by faithfully recreating the ambiance of the classic horror film. But it can't sustain that momentum for even half of its campaign, and it turns out to be a hugely disappointing and frustrating slog. It may seem strange to complain that a game's too long, but when the genuine scares of being hunted by an unstoppable predator are so diluted by repetition and padding, Isolation's epic length really does work against it.
So, here's one point where I'll defend Mr. Ryan McCaffrey. I think that's who reviewed this, right? I think it should say somewhere. Yeah, Ryan McCaffrey. Here's a point where I'll defend Ryan on this. When you are doing a review for a game like this, no one you know is playing it. There is nothing you can Google about it. There is no information. There's no Let's Plays. There's nothing, okay? You are playing it in a vacuum. And so when you're going through levels, and like he was in that, we laughed at it because he's like, I'm in an air vent and I'm not moving and it still saw me. It's like, yeah, well, it's because you were peeking through the vents. That's by design, because if you were in a situation like this and there's an alien that's walking around with heightened senses and it hears you shifting in the locker trying to peek out through vents, it's going to see you and get you. But if that wasn't communicated to him, that no, that's not a bug, that is a feature. That is it working correctly. That is it seeing you peek through the vents and hearing you move. Even in that little way with the right stick or just peeking through it, that's it working correctly. If he didn't know that, it could feel like a bug. So there is a certain element to this where I do think like maybe some of these cool AI behaviors he mistook as malfunctions when it's actually the game working exactly as it was designed. But then you get to the other stuff where he's frustrated with like how later levels challenge you with all of the different mechanics at once, how the weapons don't do anything to the xenomorphs. And like at some point I'm starting to think that you just don't like these types of games, that you don't like these suspense, thriller, horror type games, because that's just kind of how they work. Like it only is scary if you can't really fight back. That's the whole point. That's why Outlast worked so well back in the day as a horror game, because all you had was a video camera to see in the dark and that's it. So there was no fighting back, and that made you weaker and then made the stakes much higher. Whereas if you had a massive machine gun or shotgun or something, it wouldn't feel as threatening because you could fight your way out of it. So this is why reviewers' selection, I think, is really crucial, because the danger, kind of the problem, I think, with a lot of the stuff that IGN gets themselves caught in is that they are viewed as a monolith. You know, IGN is this massive thing. It's IGN. But in reality, their reviews are done by a bunch of individuals. You know, they're done by here. Maybe there's some reviewers that they have that have more weight, like Ryan McCaffrey, I think is one of their chief editors or lead reviewers, whatever his title is. He's one of the big guys. So maybe there's some bigger reviewers in there, but it's a bunch of individuals. And then their opinions form sort of the matrix that is IGN. And, you know, it's really easy to be like, well, no, it's IGN reviewed it as this, when in reality, it's this one guy that works for IGN reviewed it this way. but it gets lumped into IGN as a whole. That's what IGN, the institution, thinks of a game. And that's why the selection of the reviewer can be really, really crucial. Because if you select the wrong person to review it, you're going to have a useless opinion at the end of it. Like, if you have somebody that, and we all know these types of people, if you have somebody that hates From Software style games, Soulsborne games, they're terrible at them, and you assign them to review the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC, do you think that their perspective on it will be particularly valuable to fans of this type of game? Obviously no. Obviously no. And it shouldn't, like, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just because they don't play those kinds of games. I have a buddy who is obsessed with Nintendo, is amazing at Smash Bros, at the Mario platformers, at Mario Kart, like plays everything on the Switch. That is his platform of choice, and he's very, very good at all of it. But if I asked him to play like Red Dead Redemption 2, he'd find it boring as hell, and he would complain about it constantly and be like, I don't know, man, it's just so slow compared, like, where are the mushrooms? You know, he'd be losing his mind. And that doesn't mean that his opinions on the games he plays are invalid or are valueless or useless. It just means that that's not his realm. I'm not going to go to a guy that is a mechanic and ask him to cook me a filet mignon and then complain when the steak isn't very good. Like, it's different specialties. They focus on different things. And I think often IGN will have, maybe not often, but there are times where IGN has had these reviews where I think they just frankly had the wrong people reviewing it. And they end up complaining in their review that the game wasn't like this thing they wanted it to be, when it was never going to be that way. It's like, yeah, it wasn't supposed to be like a first person shooter with, like, you know, weapons that can target the xenomorph. Like, it's supposed to be this suspense thriller horror game that is extremely stressful and pushes you to the limit, and where the stakes are super, super high. One screw up and you're dead. You didn't listen carefully enough in the room. You didn't hear it clanging around in the vents. You died. That's the kind of game that this is. But a lot of these complaints are specifically over it being that way. And so you're complaining, can you believe in Red Dead Redemption 2, I have to ride my horse to get places? Like, give me a car, am I right? You'd be like, no, that's part of the whole thing. Like, yes, it's horses. What are you talking about? Yeah, it would drive you crazy. But that's kind of where these critiques can land if somebody is expecting the wrong thing and they just don't connect with it, but then they complain about it not being that way. I've had games like this, like back in the day, 2019, I think it was, or maybe 2020, whenever Ghost of Tsushima came out. And I was like, honestly, it's just not clicking for me. I just cannot get into the game. I just find it frustrating to play. And so I didn't make a video complaining about it because I was like, people obviously love it. I just cannot get into it. So instead of me complaining and making a video trying to find things to pick apart, I'm just not going to cover it because I'm not able to get into it. It's just not clicking with me. And then it came out on PS5 and I tried again and I loved it. And it was amazing. I was like, I get it now. I don't know why the 60 frames made the difference for me, but it really did. And all of a sudden I fell in love with that game. I was like, okay, I get it now. Now I feel like I can talk about it because it clicked. It made sense to me. If something makes sense to me and it's bad, that's one thing. Like, I think Forspoken as a game makes sense to me, what they were trying to do. I just think it's bad. Suicide Squad makes sense to me. I just think it's really bad. Same with Concord. Makes sense. It's just bad. But if something's not clicking with me, if I don't get it, I'm not going to make like a bunch of content complaining about it because it just doesn't follow. It's like, you just don't get it. And that's okay. Not every game is for everybody. Let's hear the defense of this. So this is one thing that IGN, I don't know if they still do this, but they used to do it where they would do these like roundtable, literally a roundtable interviews with the staff, usually the reviewer, and then other reviewers from IGN and maybe one of their journalist compatriots, and they would talk about the review and ask questions and poke and prod. And it's always very interesting. You know, there was, what game was it? Evolve was one of these where I think they gave it like a 10 or something.
Vince Ingenito here. I'm the guy that got to review Evolve for IGN, and I'm sitting here with my friends Mitch,
me,
James,
hello,
and Alex.
Hi.
And now we're gonna jump into some of the finer points of what we think makes Evolve so wonderful. But before that, let's take a
Bear in mind, Evolve is completely dead and abandoned, and it was it's kind of a mess. But like there's that. There's also, I think Deathloop was another one where they got some pressure for how they reviewed it, because there's like, it's a 10 out of 10, but there's like tons of problems. But anyway, let's hear how they describe it. I find this always fascinating, and I do like this in concept. Okay, I love the idea of a reviewer, especially for a big group like this, being willing to come on camera and kind of justify and defend the score against people who either haven't played the game or maybe have played it and have different opinions. I think that would be most valuable. Where like if I did a Starfield review and I was like, hey, yeah, I just found it kind of lackluster. And then we have somebody that played it and really liked it come on and ask questions and poke and prod and be like, well, what did you think about this? What did you think about that? I think that can be really valuable. But let's hear what he says to defend his review.
Alien Isolation review discussion panel. Let's roll the verdict portion of my very recent review.
Alien Isolation seemed like the perfect Alien game on paper, and early on it seems to deliver on its promise by faithfully recreating the ambiance of the classic horror film. But it can't sustain that momentum for even half of its campaign, and it turns out to be a hugely disappointing and frustrating slog. It may seem strange to complain that a game's too long, but when the genuine scares of being hunted by an unstoppable predator are so diluted by repetition and padding, Isolation's epic length really does work against it. Someday, someone is going to make an incredible Alien video game that checks every box. But sadly, Isolation is not it.
All right, gentlemen, it's been a divisive review. Few of the major outlets have been also bit disappointed in the game, had some criticisms, not just me. And then a number of other outlets loved it.
Yeah.
So I wanted to see where, get some other opinions here, see where you guys fall. I'm going to start with Brian Altano. Brian, I think all of us were really looking forward to this game, and it really seemed like the chosen one. This was going to be the one that returned the Alien video game brand to restored its prestige. Obviously, I didn't feel that way. I'm kind of curious where you're at in the game and how you're feeling so far.
So yeah, I've played like the first 4 or 5 hours, and some chunks I've actually played twice because of preview events. And that's kind of important to state that when we do go play a game, we're given just a piece of it.
Yeah.
We play it for a little while, and we go home. We go, man, that was great. And reading your review, it seemed like there was you obviously went in really.
Couldn't have taken that cough out in post, man. Like, they're all on different mics. You could have just muted his mic while he's coughing. There's occasionally some things where it's like, guys, come on. Like, you got $1 million set here. What are we doing?
Man, that was great. And reading your review, it seemed like there was you obviously went in really wanting to love this.
Absolutely.
And there was a lot that you did really like, but it just kept doing those things over and over again and kept going and going. So I think it's like, it's sort of like when someone is watching a movie and they pause it and they go on Facebook and they go, man, this movie's awesome. And it's like, okay, well, maybe you should go back and finish the movie. And then they do, and then they come back and they're like, oh man, I shouldn't have said anything.
I liken it a lot to Dan Stapleton, our reviews editor. You and I were talking about how, I run previews for IGN, you run reviews. And, previews are like the trailers for movies. They're like the previews, where the perfect example is I am now so done with, I'm not going to get hyped up for superhero movies anymore, because Man of Steel, Dark Knight Rises, Iron Man 3, all great trailers. And I'm like, man, those movies look amazing. And then just for me, when I went to see those films, each of those 3 films really disappointed me in some way. And it's just because you're seeing a little awesome slice, a carefully curated slice.
Yeah,
I'm not saying they're being deceptive, but they're showing a part that shows well. And
I mean, hype makes you stupid for once. We all agree with that. But I think what they're answering, or what they're talking about right here, is a very interesting little tidbit that I hear all the time, okay? Specifically, like, people will say, well, you did a preview of this game, and you said it looked really good or had a ton of potential. And now your review, you say it's bad. What gives? And that is a ridiculous thing to complain about, because obviously when you're playing a vertical slice, a little sliver that the publisher or developers have specifically chosen to make their game look as good as possible, it probably is going to feel better than worse. And you can play a slice of a game and it can feel really good and play really, really well, but then you get the whole game and you're like, oh, yeah, not great. Like if I had played the first hour or two of Starfield as a preview event, I would have walked away being like, okay, I think BGS has actually done it. I think they've actually pulled this off. This is amazing. It was when I played it for more than 20 hours that it started to fall apart and you start to see the same locations over and over again. And so it's the broader context that informs the full and final opinion. It's not just the preview, but there are people that will just complain because the preview you said looked really good, but then this final product you have problems with. It's like, I mean, you kind of would hope that your opinion could evolve and change as you saw more of the game. And it wasn't just an affirmation of whatever. To a certain extent, I guess you could also give a little bit of defense. You know, we've made fun of some individuals for hyping up Redfall. There were some Xbox channels that got to go to a preview event for Redfall before it launched. And a lot of them said it looked amazing. It looked like this, you know, the team that did Prey, they're back. They're working hard. They're doing some amazing stuff. I think one person said that it was potentially the next big Xbox franchise, which is pretty hilarious in retrospect. But in their defense, they were shown vertical slices that were very carefully chosen to make it look really, really, really good. And then when they got the whole thing, they're like, okay, well, this is going to be harder to defend. You know, oh, geez. So I do think that there is perhaps a little bit of defense to be thrown out there. But I think with all of these, Rango, cookie dough can taste good, but the cookies can be nasty. Yeah, I think that perhaps that's a good comparison. Or like recently I got sushi and I got it's like a shaggy roll or whatever, and it's got the crab meat and then this delicious like spicy mayo on. It's very good, very good. First bite, best bite of any sushi you've had in your life. You get 3 slices, 3 little pieces in, and you feel like your stomach is participating in an Irish bar fight. Like it is explosive. The first bite was amazing. Everything else, you're fighting for your damn life. Is it worth it? Maybe. Still, yeah. You know what? Yeah, it was. It was still delicious. I will order it again. But the point is, just because a little taste is amazing, that does not mean that the whole thing will be amazing as well. So I do want to defend them on this point. I do think that that's a fair point. If people are like, your previews were positive, why is your review now negative? That's a stupid thing to throw out. Like, previews are designed to be better and to play well and to make you excited. So yeah. Anyway.
After 20 hours of Alien, I didn't, in the big picture, as taken as a whole, it didn't do that for me.
Yeah, the whole 20 hours was not as strong as the little tidbits that were shown.
Yeah.
And it makes a little sense.
Isn't it funny hearing these voices and seeing the faces with them? Because you've probably heard most of these voices in reviews, even in the last decade. Most of these guys are still here. I'm not familiar with the gentleman on the far right, but I'm pretty sure he's still there. I know Ryan is. Ryan was actually at Summer Game Fest when I was there this summer. Dan, I don't know if he was there, but I know Dan still does tons of their reviews. I forgot his name, but I think he still works there too. So these guys are OGs. They've been around forever. Again, this video is 10 years old.
Yeah, the whole 20 hours was not as strong as the little tidbits that were shown.
Yeah.
And it makes a little sense. Like if you're a developer and you're working on a game that's 20 hours long and you have an hour to show it to people to get them excited about it.
Absolutely.
You show the parts that aren't the most exciting parts, and maybe you leave out the parts that aren't as proud of. And every game has its highs and lows. So that's why previews are often a lot more positive than the review. Once you play the whole thing, you're also faced with playing the entire game all the way through. You have to take the bad with the good. And
this is why even with like Dragon Age, I've told you all my impressions of Dragon Age, the Veilguard, were very, very positive. I really liked what I played, but that was a preview. We played about 7 hours. If you skipped lunch, you got to 7 hours. Like, I ate lunch at my computer while playing. I'm not sure if I was supposed to do that, but they didn't stop me. But otherwise, if you ate lunch and took the lunch break, you could play for 6. But anyway, we played a lot of it, and my impressions were very positive. But just like this, there's a potential that maybe we get the final game and it's actually got a lot of problems, and it's like, oh, didn't see this at the preview. So you never know. But typically, like, if a game has a bad preview, the game's probably really bad, because if the best they had to show was bad, the worst they have to show is probably way worse. So I think, good previews are necessary for a good game. I can't think of a time where there was a game that had really bad previews that ended up being amazing. Maybe somebody knows.
A case.
Subluality, the food was actually pretty good. They had bagels. They had really good bagels too.
I'm actually very early in there, so I haven't gotten to the alien yet.
Oh,
but
that's pretty early.
But I am like in the early paragraphs of your review. It's like this is a very well recreated version of Alien.
Makes a great first impression, doesn't it?
The atmosphere is spectacular. I'm not so high on a few of the unintuitive parts. Like I don't think it's doing a great job of teaching me its puzzle elements, but you know, I'm sure it's going to get a lot better as soon as the alien shows up and starts terrorizing me. Jose, though, I know has played more than us two combined. Yeah. You're what, 10 hours in?
I'm 10 or 11 hours in. And
so you're a little past halfway, basically.
Pretty much, yeah. And I will say my opinions of it are all over the place right now, where there are things I really admire about the game in terms of I do like the unpredictable AI in the alien and in having a stalker. I played plenty of stealth games in like my career as a gamer. And I feel like, you know, they always, some try to play the cat and mouse angle, but in the end, you're not a mouse. You're actually a cat. You actually end up a cat at some point, right? You get claws and you're able to fight back.
Splinter Cell, perfect example.
Yeah, Metal Gear, or like there's a lot of games that fall under that. In this one, you are very much the mouse. Like the minute the alien sees you, you are dead and you are done. And when it comes to that, the game does that really well, I feel, like in terms of what you guys said, right? Like walking around this 1970s vision of the future. Absolutely captures that really well. The spirit of how the alien films sort of feel captures that really well. But when they take the alien away and they pull out another enemy sort of type, the androids essentially, they kind of focus on that part. I feel like the game really starts to fall apart there. And that's where I really just started feeling like conflicted about it because, you know, there is sort of a puzzle element to the androids. There's not one good solution. You can't just run up and melee them. They're stronger than you. There's also the aspect that this game never really makes you feel comfortable with a weapon. Think about it, you play stealth games, you get a freebie, right? You walk up, sneak up behind someone, you know, you get to kiss the ogre or something, right, from Shadow of Mordor. This game never does anything like that. They want you to feel kind of conscious and sort of afraid of actually interacting with things.
When did Outlast come out? What are some other horror games from this period that very intentionally left you unable to fight back? It's 2013. Oh geez, I feel old. It was 2013. Really? Yeah. If you've never played Outlast, it's the spooky season. It's only $20. Very good, and it is this done miraculously well. Not for the faint of heart though. And good God Almighty, if you're gonna play the DLC Whistleblower, do not play that if you are squeamish. It is like a lot. There's a lot there, but like these types of horror games were around during this time, and I find it so bizarre that they're complaining that like the enemies and monsters or androids are like more powerful than them. It's like, yeah, kind of the point. Kind of point. Amnesia was the first. Okay, yeah. So there were other ones around this time. I'm trying to figure out like the exact complaints. Did you eat them all? When I got there was only bad food left. I think I had 2 bagels. I might have been part of the problem. I'm very sorry. I might have been part of it.
But it comes at the expense of when they toss in other enemies, you don't feel like you really can handle what they are throwing at you. And then they also get really ridiculously hard with the android especially.
And you're playing on normal difficulty, right?
I am playing on normal difficulty.
You took my advice, I see.
I did, yeah. I wasn't going to try and do it on hard, even though the game recommended it. And for the most part, I feel like one of the things I admire is that this game also is a lot about sort of capitalizing on opportunities, like seizing opportunity. Like, oh my God, the alien's gone. Sneak down this hallway under this next desk. Okay, where is it now? And then start looking around. But that said, I still feel like there's huge pacing issues where I feel like they don't know how to balance when the alien should be around and when it shouldn't be. And then when they replace it with something else,
they don't know how to balance. Bro, the whole point is that they don't balance it. It's a dynamic, like, that's the point. You know, like, that doesn't mean that it's good, to be fair, okay? Because there's lots of bad game design choices that have been made, and it's like, well, that's the point. Like, that's the design. They did it that way intentionally. That doesn't mean it's good, right? Like, there were complaints. I'm going to use the example again. There were complaints with, like, Deathloop, where people said, no, the bad AI where they don't see you is by design, because it has to do with the time loop mechanic. And then the like, I forget the exact excuse, but there was somebody that went through and like outlined why in the lore it could be explained why they were not as attentive as they should have been. I was like, okay, cool. It's still bad. Like, just because there's an excuse for it doesn't mean that it's magically good all of a sudden. You know, I can explain something away narratively. That doesn't mean that it's good. In Death Stranding, I don't like that there's like no wildlife. There's nothing else in the world as you're exploring it to make it feel like it's worth saving. I understand you could be like, well, the timefall would kill the animals. Okay, well, first of all, why are animals in the opening cinematic flying away from the timefall? Why don't they come out when the timefall goes away? Why aren't there deer and birds and rabbits hopping around? Like, there should be, because we see them in the opening cinematic, but then they're just gone. So like, there's things like that. But just because you can narratively justify why a choice was made does not mean that the choice was necessarily good. Having said that, though, with this, the whole gameplay mechanic of the alien that has an AI that's not controlled, that is totally freeform, that is part of the point. Like, that's part of what we're doing here.
It's not really a good substitute.
And I've watched both of you guys go through this kind of up and down sensation with this game, where it's like, oh, this is really good stealth, and then, oh, I'm getting to this really frustrating part.
Yeah.
And it seems like you can almost recommend this game if you're only planning to play like the first 6 hours.
I tweeted that exact thing, actually.
So I'm almost done.
Yeah. I mean, it's for the first 5 or 6 hours till well, there's sort of somewhat of a climactic point that you've already passed.
Yeah.
You know, if you stop at that climactic point and treat that as the end of the game, you'll walk away pretty happy.
Yeah.
I mean, a big part of my criticism with this game, which I think just a lot of people haven't really been able to understand yet, just because they haven't played all the way through the game or even necessarily played the game at all, is that it just the goalposts get moved back so many times. It's okay, we're gonna get off the ship now. All right, we're heading for the home stretch, and whoop, there's the rug. We just yanked it out from under you. No, we're not. And it just put it.
I mean, I think that frustration is also part of the genre. Again, like the thing with all of this is you're okay in not liking that. That's okay. But I think that that's what this game was always going to be. And I think that that's this genre in general. It's like, can you believe I was playing Outlast and then I reached this point where I was going to climb out the window and it wouldn't let me. And then I thought maybe if I did this, I could have escaped, but I didn't do that. I went back to save my friend or whatever. And it's like, yeah, well, that's just kind of what we're doing. You don't have to love it. You don't have to play this game. Maybe it's just not for you, and that's okay. Maybe this is more niche and it's not trying to appeal to as broad of an audience as it could have. But again, like it's just kind of part of the point.
You know, it's fine if that happens a couple times. Like, all right, I got to do one more thing. But it goes on and on for hours. Even right up until the end, there's one more. No. There's one more of those at the very end. It's just like, come on, I'm ready to leave now.
And I think this is like, it's sort of, we've learned in the genre, and filmmakers have learned in the genre, decades ago, that horror is not really something that sustains itself for 2-3 hours. Like, there are no like 4-hour horror movies like the way you would see like a director's cut of Lord of the Rings. Yeah. Oh, here's Peter Jackson's 4-hour horror movie. It's too much because after 2 hours, it's not a horror movie anymore. It's a hostage situation.
Yes.
Like you're still there, and it's like for 20 hours. That's a day of your life is spent playing cat and mouse with this alien, and I have some problems with that because I love difficult games. I love games where I die a lot. Like
the original Ninja Gaiden, well, the original Xbox version of Ninja Gaiden is one of my favorite games of the last 15 years.
And there's something about that game and about games like Super Meat Boy and stuff like that where they're hard, but they're challenging and they're also rewarding in the sense that you feel like you are you're overcome.
I'm sorry, just. This is everybody right now as they're explaining this. Okay, just watch this face. This is everybody, what everybody's feeling.
The sense that you feel like you are over, you're
just. I'm a menace. I'm sorry.
Overcoming obstacles in set patterns and figuring them out. And I feel like Alien has some of that, but it also has that random element of just like, now in Super Meat Boy, if I go from here to here.
I'm sorry, comparing this game to Super Meat Boy is just insane. Like, I get what he's trying to say, which is the difficulty feels rewarding and therefore difficult games can be fun if they're rewarding, but they're just so different. I just don't think it's even in the same universe, you know? Like I don't understand that comparison beyond the most like bare bones. It's a hard game. Yeah, but this is a hard game that's designed to be like exhausting. And I agree with the sentiment that like exhausting games are not necessarily always fun. I think this is one of those games that isn't probably fun in a traditional sense. Like it's exhausting to play. But there's a lot of games I think worth playing that are exhausting and are not fun. Like I don't know if I'd even say that like The Last of Us Part 1 or Part 2 are fun games. I think that they're worth playing, but I wouldn't probably call them fun. In the same way, like, I'm trying to think of another one that's been... I mean, even Silent Hill 2, the remake, I'm not sure if I would consider it fun. Like, I'm not feeling like giggly or joyous while I'm playing through it. It's satisfying. It can be rewarding, but I'm not sure if it's fun. You know, I think it's a different thing, and that's okay. Video games are one of these genres, or one of these things that can span genres and can span emotional payoffs, where sometimes it's worth playing because it's like emotionally intense. Like there was that sort of 2D sprite looking game. Was it To the Moon? About the old guy who's dying and is like reliving memories of his past. That game, very emotionally intense. I wouldn't call it fun, but it's something you should absolutely play, you know? And so I just think games don't have to be fun. And that's okay. That's part of the magic of video games, that they don't have to be fun. But complaining that a game isn't fun is like I don't think that's necessarily dismissive.
I memorize all the platforms and all the traps, and I get through and I know what to do. Sure. When I play Splinter Cell, I know that the walking patterns of a guard is going to go a specific way, and I know how I'm going to take him out to get me to the next place, Okay, I can see why people freaked out at this point in the comments section. We'll look through some of those. Because he's complaining about the literal, like, defining gameplay feature of this game, which is that the AI for the xenomorph is not clearly defined. I memorize all the platforms and all the traps, and I get through and I know what to do. I feel like Alien has some of that, but it also has that random element of just like, now in Super Meat Boy, if I go from here to here, I memorize all the platforms and all the traps, and I get through and I know what to do. Sure. When I play Splinter Cell, I know that the walking patterns of a guard is going to go a specific way, and I know how I'm going to take him out to get me to the next place, In Alien, I do all of those things, and then suddenly a tail pops from the ceiling.
So I will say that.
Yes. That's the point. Like, exactly, Loyalty. Isn't that the point of the game? And maybe we can't rewind the clocks, okay? So I don't know what the marketing was like in the lead up to this game in October of 2014, okay? I don't know what they were saying about this at preview events in the summer of 2014. I don't know. Because it seems to me like pretty clear this is the defining feature of the game, is that the AI doesn't work the way a traditional AI would work. And that's why people were really excited about it, because it was going to be different. But it seems like they're complaining that the AI does not work the way that a traditional game's AI works. And it's like, that's the whole selling point, you know, and you're complaining about it. It's a weird choice.
Sorry, that's something that you said in your review, is that the unpredictability of the Alien is both a strength and a weakness.
It's a plus and a minus.
Which is you know, you're a big fan of the old Thief games, I know.
Huge.
And like those games are classic stealth, hardcore stealth. And the reason they work is because they're predictable. Like the guards are predictable. You know, if I do this, they're going to react in this way.
I think this is interesting. There is an interesting debate to be had with whether a fully dynamic like AI system can be gamified, because to a certain extent, like, video games are not realistic by design. There are certain rules and things that you follow through on that make them fun or engaging or rewarding. And it's like in The Witcher 3, Geralt is a witcher, okay? He can slay any peasant he wants without any issue, okay? The skill diff is wide, right? But if Geralt is a level or two under-leveled when he goes to Skellige for the first time, a single bandit can one-shot him. Now, does that make sense? No. Is that realistic? No. But it's because it's a video game and they have to scale it according to that based on their leveling system and to keep it engaging when you run into a bandit in that area as you play through the game. It's just one of those things where it's a video game. It's not realistic, but it's a video game. I remember complaining about it in my original critique in 2017. And now looking back, I'm like, well, it's just one of those things that has to happen, to make the video game make sense. So just because it's not realistic doesn't mean it's bad. And if it were realistic and Geralt was able to slay any humanoid basically that he wanted without much difficulty, unless they were a witcher or some super highly trained knight or something, that would make the gameplay of a game like The Witcher 3 much less interesting because there would be no encounters out in the world against any humanoids that would have any stakes whatsoever. So it's one of those kind of necessary evils. With this, I think in a similar vein, the question they're debating is whether a realistic AI that doesn't behave in those predictable ways can be used in a video game and still be fun. I think quite clearly, looking back through hindsight, we can see that you pretty clearly can. This game is a cult classic for a reason, and in large part that's because people found it so captivating that you could play through these levels and they will always be different because the alien doesn't think in the same linear way as typical AI systems do, where they go on this set path and route. They actually change their behaviors as they go through levels and change based on your behaviors. I love that kind of thing. There was another game that kind of did this where it learned, the AI enemy learned from your behaviors and would do things differently. So, I mean, even to a certain extent in Batman Arkham City, Mr. Freeze, you remember he learns from how you were fighting him. So if you tried to do that boss fight just popping up from grates, he would spray the grates with ice so that it wouldn't, you couldn't climb in there anymore. And then it would be like, oh, you're jumping down from the gargoyles. Okay, he's going to blow them up. You mean Mrs. Freeze? Yeah, I guess now. So that there's all sorts of interesting things like that. You're right. They did it in in Shadow of War or even Shadow of Mordor, where if you fought one of the orcs and killed him, and then they come back and were resurrected and whatever the term was in the game for that. But he comes back and he's learned from how he died and he's now invulnerable to stealth finishers. It's brilliant. Plenty of games have done this non-linear thing where they learn from how you play to counter you. I love that. I think it's fascinating. And I think it's a huge strength of a game like this. And to hear them complaining about that strength is just kind of bizarre.
If you take that away, though, it becomes a little bit of a crapshoot, right? It's like you don't
trial and error.
Yeah, well, you don't know. You can do the same thing twice, and you'll succeed once and fail the other time because it's luck. Whether the alien
is it luck? That's the problem. If it were just luck and it was just a dice roll, yeah, that would feel bad. I did everything right, and this time I just happened to lose. Sure, in a stealth game with high stakes, that could feel bad, but I think the point is it's not just luck.
do the same thing twice and you'll succeed once and fail the other time because it's luck whether the alien will react in the way you anticipated. So, and that does add to tension. It makes it very scary.
Sure, it does, yeah.
But it's also supremely frustrating if you can't predict how
particularly when the save points are all. I'm not advocating that this game should have had checkpoint saves, but I like that you are sort of battling from one save point to the next. But when I genuinely had times where there's actually one time where I was at the save terminal and whoosh, dead. And then I had to back up about 30 minutes.
Do you think they played this without sound? I'm starting to wonder if he was playing this without headphones on. Because there are sound cues. You could hear it running. Was he just sprinting to try and get there faster to save before it got him? I'm starting to wonder with a lot of this, because it sounds like there's just such fundamental misunderstandings of core gameplay systems. They all have these similar misconceptions or frustrations, at least the people on this couch, which is what's so fascinating. They're complaining that the behavior of the AI is unpredictable. It's yes. That's why so many people love it. I play this game 100% crouch, being near the ground grounded me. Yeah. got to be in tune with the Earth, with the space station itself. It is just weird. Like if you've played the game, you're like, but like you're complaining about one of the coolest things, you know? It's just kind of wild to me, you know? It's the same thing like if people complained that they were playing The Last of Us Part 2 or The Last of Us on a hard difficulty where like ammo is really scarce or crafting materials are really scarce. The reason they do that is because they want you to be very intentional and careful with when you use weapons, when you do this, when you do that, where to deploy this smoke bomb versus this one. Like they want you to be very intentional with it, and that's by design. But to play it on hard and then complain that there's not enough ammo for you to just go through shooting everybody just demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of what that difficulty level was trying to do and what the developers were trying to do with that level and how you handle the game. And you know, it's always kind of cringe when people are like, you're playing the game wrong. But I do think there are ways to play games in a manner where you will not have fun. Like I do. I think that there are plenty of ways to do that. I still think it's probably on the developers to teach players the right way to go about it, or to better communicate to players what they should expect. And maybe that's something where, to their credit, maybe in the lead up and marketing campaign through 2014, they were not clear on how this would work. And so maybe that's why there's some misunderstanding, because pretty clearly there is a misunderstanding between the developers, the game, and these reviewers, where some reviewers at certain outlets got it and understood what was being done and ate it up, and then others just didn't understand and were just frustrated that it wasn't working the way they thought it would. And I just find that fascinating. It's the same thing that happened with Deathloop, where for some people, some reviewers ate it up and were like, I get what they're doing. And then for others, like, no, it's really shallow and uninteresting. I don't know if there's a right answer to either one of these, because to a certain extent, like, well, if that's what you thought of the game, that's your perspective. Cool. Maybe it wasn't for you, but I do always find it so fascinating when games are reviewed by the industry and then there's a totally polarized opinion of the game. I find it so interesting. Luality, I have a take that for horror games, you should never play them in too hard modes or simply not horror anymore. Oh, I scrolled past, I can't read it. You should never play them in too hard modes, or it is simply not horror anymore. You become used to the danger and monster and you have an action game. A horror game is best when you almost die, but never actually die. Staying in the edge is horrifying. Yeah, I do think if you can rely on just resets, just load and try it again, I do think it loses some of the potency. One of my problems with like Outlast 2, I really liked the first game. Outlast 2, though, I think it largely turns into a sprinting simulator where you just sprint around the level trying to hit the checkpoint to move on to the next level. And yeah, if you play it the way they probably intended you to, where you stealthily are creeping through the cornfields and hiding in the barrel and all that, it's not that big of a deal. Or rather, it's much more suspenseful. It's much scarier playing that way. But if you can sprint through the whole thing, like why wouldn't you? If you give players a tool to shortcut something, they'll use it. It's just what gamers do, and that's by design. I mean, that's just how gamers play games. But I think it would be on the developers over at Red Barrel for for Outlast 2, where I feel like they didn't do a good job of punishing the people that just sprint right by stuff, because it just kind of broke all the stealth systems if you just sprinted past them, because the grab animations were usually slower than you could just sprint past them and get to the checkpoint. So yeah, anyway, it's a separate issue.
I will say this, though, in your example with harder games, I will say that the difference between Alien and those games, though, is that Alien is exhausting to play because of the amount of stress that you feel.
Right,
and the duress
it's intentionally
that you feel
stressful
as a player. And yeah, and I feel that the limitations and the way it's presented, that's a factor that I think should have been considered in its length, because I feel like part of overstaying that welcome is probably compounded in a game when progress doesn't really happen at the same interval of time, because it really depends on where's the alien right now. Is the alien in play? Is he around the corner? And they're even weird as far as like the phones and the save system go, where at certain points early on in the game, especially when the alien's around, I feel like I'd only see 1 or 2 phones maybe. And I'm at a point in the game where I'm running into phones every couple of minutes. And I'm like, okay, it just felt really odd to me, because I felt like, if anything, they should have leaned on phones in the earlier part. But I'm not entirely sure why that ended up that way. And
I mean, again, I think if you just disagree with the artistic direction or the gameplay direction, that's, again, totally fine. But I think that the scarcity of phones was specifically to make it feel this way, to make it feel so crazy. There is something to be said for longer games that are stressful and emotionally exhausting. Like, I think, to bring it up again, The Last of Us Part 2, emotionally exhausting. Not as stressful. Alien Isolation is stressful, where there's just never a break, you know, whereas The Last of Us has flashbacks and stuff to give you breathers and some breaks. But it's emotionally exhausting. And I think that hurt The Last of Us Part 2. I think that game was too long for what it is. By the time it's over, you're like, oh, thank God. And with Alien Isolation, there's a similar feeling where you're like, oh, thank God, I'm finally safe. I got off like, I'm good, right? I'm finally there. Safe is maybe not the right word, but you know, you get what I mean. It's over. So maybe there is something there where it could connect better with people if it was shorter and it wasn't so intense for so long, because I do think a lot of people probably did boot this up and put it down for a month or two and then come back to it later if they ever did. I do think that probably happened with plenty of people, but yeah, it's probably a separate issue, separate topic.
I will say though that I find the alien is the most fascinating part of that game, because I honestly do like everything that it's throwing at me, its unpredictability and sort of the wild stories that come from that. Like I had.
Okay. Okay, hold on. Hair decreases left to right. Who said that? Where is it? Hold on. I just saw it. Was it Jamie? It was Jamie. Yeah, hair decreases left to right. Yeah, it kind of is the different stages. And then you know, you get the Rogaine and it comes back. See, that's great. Now that you pointed that out, I can't. Come on.
I had an instance where there were humans, and I threw out a noisemaker because I'm like, oh, I'll just stick the alien on them. This will be fine. It took out all the humans, and then that became my problem. Now the alien is in play. He's on the floor looking for me, and it's a tight corridor. Eventually, it saw me through the.
Yeah, again, that's the point, dude. Like, they're complaining about one of the coolest little reversals. Listen to this again.
And I threw out a noisemaker because I'm like, oh, I'll just stick the alien on him. This will be fine. It took out all the humans, and then that became my problem. Now the alien is in play. He's on the floor looking for me, and it's a tight corridor. Eventually, it saw me through the grate of a vent, ran underneath, took me out, and I was like, oh, God. So second time through, decided not to throw the noisemaker, snuck by those humans. Alien never showed up at all.
Exactly. Isn't that awesome? Isn't that great? Okay, if he's saying he likes it, that's awesome. That's good, okay? But this is the problem. It's like, for him, really cool. That's exactly what these guys are complaining about, because it's not predictable. They're like, no, that tool should be able to take those out. Like, that's exactly the point, though.
Yeah,
and it played completely differently to me.
And what compounds,
yeah, it felt really cool. And that's why I think Alien Isolation has developed such a cult following, is because the people that have played it and kind of have those types of experiences where different tactics result in totally different outcomes. That's what makes the game so compelling. But for other people, they just want it to play in a more linear thriller game style way. And it's just not that kind of game. And then it's fair for them not to like it. You don't have to like the kind of game that Alien Isolation is, but to make sort of descriptive statements about it, being like, yeah, so it's just bad. I don't think that's fair.
Compounds the drawn out game too, as we wrap up here, is as you guys haven't seen yet, and I can't wait till people start finishing this game. When you finally make it to the end, the ending is not good. It is not a good payoff. Yeah. I'm very curious to see people's reactions to the end of the game.
So that is a big double-edged sword with game reviews, because like we expect a reviewer to finish a game in its entirety.
You wouldn't review a movie after walking out 2/3 of the way through.
Right. Yeah. So we expect a reviewer to finish a game, and if the ending is bad, that leaves you with you know, kind of a bad taste in your mouth. Kind of poisons the whole experience. I mean, a lot of games are good enough, like the original BioShock, for example, was good enough that's like, okay, that ending was not great, but the entire thing was great leading up to that. Yeah. But this one was such an up and down thing that it left you in a position where you didn't want to really recommend it.
Yeah.
Well, and just one more thing, you did play a chunk of it on normal as well, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I noticed like a lot of people said, oh, you shouldn't have played it on hard. That made it no fun. But you did play it on normal, and you were telling me that you didn't think that was going to influence your score at all.
No. Yeah. No, it's still, it doesn't, it'll make your life a little easier, but it doesn't change my criticisms of the game.
Right.
A lot needs to be.
It is a little funny to start the game on hard and then to drop it. It's a little funny.
Said of the ending and having a satisfying ending at the end of any experience, right? And when you look at the Alien movies, even the endings themselves, they're always so nebulous or strange, or there's not entirely an outcome that feels like it was worth it. But when you're talking about a video game where you had someone run this gauntlet up until the end, I kind of wonder how I'm going to feel at the end, because it sounds like it was super unsatisfying. And if that's the case, then I don't know. I kind of wonder if this game, one of its biggest sins that we haven't touched on yet, and we got to go, is that it's sort of too true to Alien in terms of trying to cram in everything, not just the alien, the companies, the androids and the class systems and all this like weirdness. I wonder if that's kind of why this ended up so long and so drawn out and ended up being an exhausting, really frustrating experience for you. Yeah.
It's a good question. But at the end of the day, it's, you're playing what you get, and what you get is about 3 times too long, in my opinion. I'll be curious to see. Yeah, what do you think of Alien as you're actually now playing through it, hopefully finishing it, or maybe you are going to decide to just walk away after 5 hours or so.
Let's see what people in the comments thought of it. Shall we? Buckle up. I think it's going to be funny. We looked at these earlier, but let's just see. Legend has it, Ryan sprinted his entire way through this game, stopping only to take slime showers from vents. Look at this guy's shoes. Clearly he has bad judgment. Dude, I'm glad I'm not the only one that noticed the shoes. He's got those New Balance. Ooh, baby. Those are like prepped for running mode. Yeah, that's pretty funny. Trying to justify his horrible review. By giving it a 5.9, you're saying the game is 0.4 points better than Duke Nukem Forever. Yeah, let that settle in. Guys, the internet is being mean to me. Let's huddle together and defend my awful review. How is this a discussion? 3 of these people haven't even finished the game. My theory is that the guy who reviewed the game, far left, didn't like the backlash he was getting, so he got a bunch of his friends together in an attempt to say, see, I'm not the only one who doesn't like the game. I mean, I don't think that's even a theory. I think that's literally the point of these IGN discussions. Occasionally, there will be discussions they do or did back in the day, I don't know if they still do them, where they have people that just straight up disagree with the take, where it's like, you really gave it a 9, you gave it a 10, you think this is worth $60, you think that this, like this is pretty common for these old discussion videos they did. Yeah, I don't think that's that scandalous, kind of the point of these types of things. Alien Isolation is a great game. I'm loving it so far. Don't listen to these guys that clearly don't know what a good game is. So I think that it's easy to Advanced Warfare got 9.1. It's easy to dismiss these things or to call into question their integrity or good faith, whatever. We've been talking this whole time as we've gone through this about it. I think the key thing that should be taken away from this is that just because one reviewer didn't connect with the game does not mean that the game is necessarily going to be bad for you, especially if they went into the game with kind of misaligned expectations, or they wanted it to be something it just frankly wasn't going to be. So like, what would be another example? Complaining that like Space Marine 2, complaining that that game is not, maybe that it doesn't have like a really solid 20-hour campaign or something. It's like, well, that's not what it was trying to be. It's like aiming for a different price point. That's just not what it is. Or complaining that Helldivers 2 doesn't have a story mode. It's like, okay, well, that's just not what it is. And those complaints would be kind of silly in a review, right? To just be like, well, to ding the score because it's not what you wanted it to be is a little silly. I will say these guys have worked for years in this industry. They are OGs through and through. I mean, this video is from 10 years ago, and I think most of these guys are still working at IGN. So they are real gamers. They do play a lot of games. They didn't like Alien Isolation, and it did end up gaining a cult following, which is pretty remarkable. But I think, it's one thing if you put out a review and you're just like, yeah, I was kind of on the wrong side of that one. Whatever. You kind of joke about it. But then there's like doubling down. And this is what people were making fun of that kind of kickstarted this whole segment that we're doing today. And that's this tweet from Ryan McCaffrey, like yesterday or 2 days ago. He's still senior executive editor at IGN. And he says, Alien Isolation 2 announced. But all those armchair industry experts out there told me that it was my review specifically that killed the sequel. I mean, it wasn't just your review. I mean, having like the biggest games journalism platform come out and give your game a 5.9, that certainly doesn't help greenlight a sequel. So I mean, it certainly didn't help, but okay, I should review this when it comes out just to F with all those people. Maybe not. Maybe not. This tweet makes you look very weird, man. It is just kind of a weird, it's just kind of a weird thing. Like I don't understand that, I don't. I don't get it. It's just a weird tweet. A little odd. Like, I think Ryan, he's done a lot of amazing work in the industry. He's been here forever. Nobody's doubting that, okay? He seems like a really good guy. And I get kind of memeing on this a little bit. It's a little funny. Okay, I agree there. But sometimes it's just like, okay, you know what? Everyone, like, it's a cult classic. People love it. I hope you enjoy the sequel. I didn't like the original. Lol, IGN sucks. I get it. Just kind of laugh at it and move on. But I swear to God, if he does the review for the second game when it eventually comes out, I swear to God, if he's the one that does it, I will lose my mind. That it would be really, really funny. Okay, it would be really funny. But immediately, like, nobody would take it seriously, which then you'd have to ask, what's the point? He took my thing.